Welcome back to Cool Couve. My name is David Benedictus.
And I'm Daria Ruggles.
Cool Couve is going beyond binary. Today, our guest is Mads Whitmarsh Jones, who's going to share their story about transitioning.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome, Mads.
Thank you, Mads. So Mads, could you please tell us how you identify?
Yes. So the terms that I use to identify myself are I am genderqueer, non-binary, transgender, demisexual, and pan or bi romantic. And those are a lot of buzzwords. But I personally really like a lot of these words, and I like the notion of labels. Not everybody does. But for me, labels have a lot of power. My favorite example is that I didn't know about asexuality at large, but I also didn't know about demisexuality until I saw someone else online use it and talk about what it meant to them. And I suddenly went, wait, that's how I feel. So the power of labels to me is in being able to name an experience that you have, even if how everybody uses those words is different for every individual. There's a power in naming that can teach other people, and that's why I like them so much.
And being heard and witnessed and recognized, I would imagine as well.
Yes, yeah, there's a validation in this idea of, oh, there's a word for that, that I've always really enjoyed. But the ones that are most relevant to today, I like genderqueer because of the notion of queer as a verb, to queer something. So the idea that you can have gender and you can queer it has always been attractive to me. Non-binary because I do feel that I am not male or female. I do have gender, and it's somewhere in the middle in there. It's sort of both. And then trans because I don't identify with the gender that I was raised as or cultured as. So those are all my words.
I love it. You have to tell us what the demi one is. What?
Yes. So demi is the other phrase that a lot of people use for this is gray ace. So not fully asexual or aromantic, but somewhere sort of in the middle. So I don't experience physical attraction to people in a way that a lot of people do. And I can aesthetically appreciate people. I think that people are beautiful, but I don't feel attracted to them until I've had some kind of other connection with them. All of the significant relationships, romantic relationships, or intimate relationships I've had in my life, I have known the person and been friends with them for 3 years first. I don't know what it is about 3 years, but it's always been 3 years.
I have a similar thing, but it's called menopause.
I mean,
can you please tell us also what is cisgender, and
yes.
When did you realize that you were not cisgender?
Absolutely. So all that cis means is I have this somewhere. I know I have this. I'm so sorry. I'm going to do this to you again. Okay.
Well, it's a confusion to me because the first time I heard it was about 2 years ago when I was teaching at Clark College.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a big forum on the racism that was going on there. And one of the students got up and mentioned cisgender. And I said, first time I heard that word. Mm-hmm. So, and I was 69 at the time. So been around a while, but so yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah,
thought it was
absolutely.
what you were born with versus what you identify with, but you can see I don't know.
Right. So I was trying to see if I could find once upon a time I had found the origin of the prefix. It's languishing in my emails somewhere. But the notion is that if you are cisgender, then you identify with the gender that you were raised as or cultured as. That's my preferred way to talk about it. Another phrase is assigned female or male at birth. One of the reasons I like using cultured as or raised as instead is because it starts to do the work of dissociating gender from physical body, because a person's physical biological sex doesn't necessarily have any impact on their experience of their gender. So starting to do that work of dissociating the two, even in the words we use, is something that I really enjoy trying to start the process of, including for myself. So if you're cis, you grew up as a gender and that gender fits you. If you are transgender, you grew up as a gender and it doesn't fit you and you identify as something else.
Perfect. And I
I
see
remembered
notes.
cis
I
is
know
on the same
exactly.
side of, trans is on
Oh,
the
okay.
other side of.
This
Oh,
is,
oh,
yeah.
say that again. Say that again.
Cis is on the same side of, and trans is on the other side of. It's
Okay.
I think it's a Latin thing.
Mhm. Sounds Latin. If I remember my 12th grade Latin, it sounds Latin. Right?
There you go.
Thank you.
So, what contributed to your decision to transition?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I definitely want to mention is that there are a lot of folks who are trans or gender expansive or um, otherwise not cis who aren't interested in taking steps to transition, and that there are multiple facets to transitioning. There's socially transitioning, which is like coming out and perhaps choosing a pronoun or changing a pronoun or changing a name or changing how you visually present yourself. That's social transition. And then physical transition or medical transition is taking steps like um, HRT, which is, I can remember this,
Hormone
hormone
replacement therapy.
replacement therapy. Yes.
Once again, menopause comes in handy.
Yes. So HRT or hormone replacement therapy and other possible surgeries. No part of transitioning is required for you to be trans. The idea of transition steps are to help increase gender congruence. So feeling recognized in your body, feeling recognized in your identity as who you are and how you feel you are. Um, and that's the thing, is that cis folks already have gender congruence. You already feel at harmony with your identity and how people identify you and how you interact with the notion of your gender. Whereas transgender folks, not all of them, but some, experience gender dysphoria, which is a lack of gender congruence. Also, you don't have to have gender dysphoria to be trans. That's also it's there's endless permutations of what transgender experience can look like, and it's deeply, deeply personal. So that's my little tangent about there's lots of different parts. None of them are required. Um, for me, I reached a point where I realized that being misgendered and existing as I was impacting me much more and impacting my mental health much more than I had thought. Where before I guess it started really when I started to realize that I didn't fully feel that female pronouns fit me, that they began to grate on me. And I was sort of uncertain about what I wanted to do about that for a really long time. And my then girlfriend, now wife, we were living together, and she said, well, do you want me to try non-binary pronouns for you? Do you just want me to try them and you can see what you think? And the first time I said no, but then eventually I did want her to start trying just to see how I responded. And for a long time, it was just her that knew, and just her using those words for me. And when I came to realize that it did suit me and I liked it very much, I started to go through the process of coming out socially. And then similarly, I hit a point where that wasn't enough for me in terms of it started impacting my mental health, or it always had, much more than I realized. And then I started to look at other options in terms of physical transition. At this point, today is, let me see, I have it written down here. I think it's 490. Yes, today is day 490 of me being on testosterone, which means that I have given myself 70 injections to date. And it's been over a year since my first procedure. I had a full laparoscopic hysterectomy last November. And there are other things that I'm probably also going to work up to, but those were the big ones. When I first went to my gender specific doctor, which I'm fortunate enough to have, those were the hysterectomy. Most of all was the starting point of I had wanted it for a really long time, and no one had ever taken me seriously before her. As is unfortunately often the case with medical experiences, is that if you happen to have a body that is assumed female, you probably have not been taken very seriously by your medical professionals at least once in your life. But she was the first doctor who yes-anded me. She was like, well, what is it that you're interested in? And I told her, and she said, okay, let's keep talking about it. And it blew me away.
Wow. So that's wonderful. Tell us a little bit more about the process that you are going through, Matt.
Sure.
What this entailed.
Sure. So I had always had a very contentious relationship with my body, and ever since I was very small. My childhood nickname rhymed with the word fatty, so you can imagine what I was called on the playground. And when I hit puberty and started to menstruate, which is never a pleasant experience, I would say I'm comfortable making that blanket statement. I guess there are probably some people who find it empowering. I will give it to them, and I salute them for it, but I don't understand that personally.
Once again, menopause.
As early as like high school, I wanted or wished that I could have a hysterectomy. Back then, it was because I knew very solidly, and I've never changed my mind now on the cusp of 30. I've always known that I was never interested in having children. And I had a lot of negative associations with the fact that I had a uterus, a lot of internalized, I think a lot of it was also like internalized misogyny, like this notion of ideas of what it is to be a woman, and the functionality of a uterus. And we all have these internalized social biases that we have to work through at some point or not, depending on the path we take. And I do think that contributed, but ultimately when I realized that I wasn't cis, another big part of it was that this function that was a part of my physical body was so foreign to me, and it gave me all of these like every association I ever had with it was negative. So finally being able to have it gone, um, after I started recovering, my body felt like fully mine for the first time in my life.
Wow.
And that has helped so much in terms of my mental health, in terms of that sense of gender congruence, that everything. I'm much more at peace with myself now that I no longer have this burden that I've been carrying my whole life. So that was the first big step. The other big step for me was deciding to do hormone replacement therapy, which for a long time I was resistant to. For a very long time, I simply thought that there were more effects that I wouldn't want than there were effects that I would. But eventually, I came to a threshold uh, where I realized that HRT could give me the body that I always wanted. It had the chance, possibly, because it affects everybody differently.
Hmm.
But there was the possibility for me to have the body I always wanted, and it was worth it to me to take that chance to finally have something that aligns with how I feel about myself, even if it was just a shot at it, not a guarantee. And that finally outweighed all of my other concerns about other effects that it might have. One of the big things that stopped me was the change of voice. As I mentioned to these two before we started recording, I attended a local art school, and I was in vocal music for all 7 years that I attended.
Mm.
And the fact that my voice, which was one of my primary instruments and modes of expression, was going to irrevocably change was a big choice. It was also it was one of the few things that I felt very good about myself consistently throughout my life. One of the very few things that I was always proud of. So risking losing it in a way, that's how I was thinking about it, was largely what stopped me for a really long time. And since I've grown to love this new voice that I have. It's very different than it was. When I was in choir, after some, of course, I was in different sections for a while there when I was younger, and then I arrived pretty firmly in mezzo soprano. And now there are tenor parts that I struggle to sing. So it's been a very interesting process in that regard.
But you're still on tune, right? You're still can hold.
I would say my ear is decent. It's not fantastic. It's decent. It's been a while since I've actually sung in like a choir setting. I'd like to get back to it again someday when we don't have a pandemic on and all that.
Yeah. Oh, won't that be exciting? You have to let us know when you're performing.
Oh, absolutely.
So you mentioned a couple things that we were talking about the support of your physician, which was a surprise, it sounds like. But what other kind of support have you had at going through the transition? Family, friends?
Absolutely. I have been extremely fortunate. I am very privileged in this way, and I know that. I have had the support of my wife, of my friends, of my family. My wife and I currently live with my parents, of even my extended family who there were definitely members who I was concerned about, that I essentially had decided that I was just going to not really bring it up and just let it organically take care of itself. And honestly, it has gone better every time than I thought that it would. I also am really lucky. I work for an organization that is very supportive, more supportive than I ever thought a place that I worked could be, frankly. And I've been extremely lucky. And in a way, working there has primed me to have as much resources as I possibly could, because I do have health insurance through my employer. It's through Kaiser. Kaiser has a, what is it called? It's the Gender Pathways Clinic. It's
Wow.
the only gender pathways clinic in the Pacific Northwest, and it's in Portland, Oregon.
Huh.
Wow.
That's where I met that doctor. And because of that, I have everything that I've talked about so far. It's really wonderful. I can't recommend them highly enough. They do incredible work, and they are absolutely swamped, because if I'm understanding correctly, Kaiser's definition of Northwest is Washington, Oregon, Northern California, and Idaho. And it's the only gender pathways clinic in that region. People fly in to see these doctors.
Wow.
And they are some of the hardest working, best people I've ever had the privilege to meet. So my gratitude for them is boundless. My surgeon too, for when I did my hysterectomy, was just, she had better bedside manner than any other provider I have ever had, and I told her so. She was amazing. She really made that experience for me. But like I said, I'm extremely lucky. If I could wave a magic wand and give every queer person as good a support as I have, even just from my parents, I would do it. Because when I decided that I was going to tell them, they were some of the first people that I wanted to tell outside of my wife. And they supported me when I came out as queer. They've supported me in everything that I've done. And I was still scared, because of you always fear that you're going to reach a bridge too far. And because of that, I wrote them a letter and I emailed it to them. And I, of course, was sweating bullets. I texted them to tell them that, I sent them something important. And within like 10 minutes, I got texts from both of them. And one of them was, "Reading now, I'm so proud of you."
Oh.
And they told me later how terrifying that must have, like, they understood how scary it must have been to open up to them like that, and how grateful they were that I did. And like I said,
Wow.
if I could give that kind of experience to every young queer person, I would do it.
What are you
Because,
scared of now?
oh my gosh. So this is a really important part of this conversation, but it's also really hard, because quite frankly, the rate of physical violence against transgender people is grossly high. I've given a couple of presentations on gender-related issues for different opportunities that I've had, and in both of them, I've talked about how the rate is 1 in 4, which is horrifying. So 1 in every 4 transgender people experiences physical violence, and the rates are higher for trans women of color, much higher. It's terrifying. When I agreed to do this, quite frankly, there was a part of me that was very worried about the fact that I was going to be showing my face. But it's important enough to me that people know that we exist, and to use my privilege as a white person, frankly, a white trans person, to talk about these things in the hopes that I can teach someone something and be a resource to other people in my community. There's also the unfortunate truth that there's also gatekeeping and bigotry even within the LGBT community. There's transphobia everywhere. That is a sad truth. And if you've heard any of the news about beloved children's authors lately, then you know that it is unfortunately much more pervasive than anybody would hope.
Something's happening at Hogwarts, huh?
You know, Hogwarts is having a revolution and is taking its IP for itself, is my view of it, because there are so many queers who those books were so foundational for, and we're just gonna not talk about her. Is how I've been. It's complicated. It's hard. It's so hard. And anything that folks have to do to like feel okay is what they have to do. But that this you'll see the acronym TERF around. That's for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, and it's biological essentialism, and unfortunately, it does exist even inside our own communities.
So, can you say more about biological essentialism?
Yes. A great example of this, of just casual biological essentialism, is unfortunately the extremely iconic Women's March pussy hat. Because the notion is that if you're a woman, you have a vagina.
Mm-hmm.
However, not all women have vaginas. That's just the whole thing. And honestly, like, the idea of the pussy hat is very clever. It is a visually powerful symbol, absolutely, which is why people make it in the trans flag colors. Because then you can both make the statement that women and women with vaginas are powerful, and not all women have them.
There you go.
But yes, it's the TERF rhetoric often comes down to this notion that you must have a vagina to be a woman, which isn't the case, even for people who would otherwise be considered cis female.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it erases whole swaths of people who have conception issues, who had to have a hysterectomy for their safety, who have anything other than what society deems woman. And biology is much, much more complicated than even the medical profession, like not necessarily doctors or scientists, but the way that the profession is set up, it's drastically oversimplified. And that is slowly becoming more communicated, which is exciting.
Isn't that why they call it a medical practice, David? You know about that, right? It's a practice.
I like that.
Evolving practice. It's an evolving practice. See, you have to think about the evolution. So you were trained one way, but then there's a whole bunch of learning that needs to happen. So I grew up in the 70s going to school, and that was just when we were transitioning from the phrase in the DSM-2 about being gayness being pathological, and,
right.
And then it came to then it moved to a normal natural variation. And then LGBTQ plus language came in. So it's a wonderful encouragement to be open, to encounter each other, to be curious about what other people's lives are like and who they are.
Absolutely.
It's a great opportunity.
I'm also really happy that you said that about that it's always growing and changing, because that's one of the big myths that it's not necessarily a myth, but that's one of the concepts that I encounter a lot in LGBTQ spaces, is this notion of, oh, I always knew. Now, there are people who truly always knew, and that's totally fair. But I think it gets used defensively in this way of, we always knew, and that's why you can't tell us that we don't exist. Well, there are also people like me who, I didn't realize that I was non-binary until I had graduated college. I was an adult, fully an adult. I had always known that there was something about gender that didn't fully sit well with me. I knew that there was some kind of gender play that I always engaged in gender play from a very young age. My friends and I did a lot of storytelling, collaborative storytelling, when I was growing up, and to this day, still do. I met my wife through a murder mystery game club on campus. So this notion of storytelling and performance has always been a part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And in a group of then all girls, I was one of the few people who almost always made male characters. And for a long time, I thought it was this way of playing with parts of my own personality that I didn't get to exercise in everyday life. And then when I was much older, it finally clicked that, oh no, it's not that I'm a girl who also likes to pretend to be a boy. It's that I'm non-binary. And that story of I always knew doesn't leave room for folks like me who grow and change.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, it takes, I feel like there's a suppressing action of, and this is also has to do with the gatekeeping within the community, which you see especially with, for example, bisexual people, of the narrative of pick a side or pick an identity. Like decide whether you're male or female, or decide whether you're non-binary. Humans grow and change, and the way that we think about ourselves can also grow and change. Oh, thank you.
Here. Can we see you not being here?
Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Ryan.
I'm going away now.
All right, bye.
I mean, unless you want me to.
No, bye.
You know, something that troubles me is why everything that you just said has to be so threatening to people. There's this really good quote that came from this BuzzFeed article that David actually sent to us, that is about Elliot Page, and it's called Elliot Page, well, it's about more than that, but Elliot Page and the Year in Anti-Trans Bigotry. When you're forever in a defensive crouch, stuck in scarcity mindset that insists other people's identities are threats to your own, you're denying yourself the much richer and more joyous reality that there are no limits to queerness, to gender expansiveness, to our ability to build a world in which everyone is housed and fed and safe and loved.
Yes.
I
love that quote.
I do too. And I, you know, the reason that we're doing this today is because I feel like with little kids, if we were all little kids together, that lots of times, unless children learn otherwise from grownups, that we celebrate our differences, that we don't use them as a road bump, we use them as a road to reach each other. And I don't know if you have any ideas on this one, or David, you want to weigh in, but how we can get, whether it's within the community or the greater community, how we get people to recognize each other's essential humanity and not be threatened by how someone else decides to express their gender.
Yes.
My experience is the storytelling is the most powerful vehicle. I just saw The Prom, for example, on Netflix, And prior to that, HBO had a documentary called Trans Hood about parents helping their trans children transition in pre-latency and adolescence. And so those kind of stories go right to your heart and to the humanity of it. And that's where you then can trick the mind and the cultural mind out of judgment, and just experience those individuals as human beings trying to understand how to best support their family member, their own selves, and to learn and to grow. So storytelling is the most powerful medium, like we're doing now.
I agree.
Mad story.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly that
And
humans
singing
are...
about it.
Yes, humans are so far, because of course the scientific community, I can't remember what it's called, but there's a scientific rule where the more you learn about any animal species, the more like complicated emotionally they are. So like, I might date myself here for future scientific discoveries, but humans we're programmed to tell stories.
Yes.
There is something biological in the keeping of our stories and in telling them. And I agree that telling our stories is a large part of why this work is so important, and how to find a way forward. Because if we can tell our stories and be heard by people who are willing to listen, that's how concepts get normalized in a culture. And that's one of the reasons that I feel so strongly about trying to share my story and trying to teach people who want to learn and support people who maybe feel that they do have a journey to go on, but they're not sure about it. There's a couple of things that you said the thing about kids, Daria, about kids not yet being primed sometimes to attack difference. And there was a book that I encountered through my work in one of your local libraries that is called Who Are You? A Kid's Guide to Gender, I believe. They have a whole website, and I was going to put it away, and I had never seen it. And I stood there in the stacks and read it and cried, because it's beautiful. It's normalizing. It has resources in the back. And my favorite part is it comes with this interactive 3-layered wheel so that you can manipulate it and change what it says. The first one says, I am, and then you pick, or is it I have? No, I am, and you can choose boy, girl, or something else. And then I have, and you can choose a body that made adults say girl, a body that made adults say boy, or a body that made adults say I'm not sure, which is huge because I didn't learn about intersexuality or intersex people until I was in college. And then the last one, which I think is the most important, is I like. And then it's a huge wheel of different activities and hobbies, and so you can manipulate it and make it reflect you. And holding that was so powerful, because I felt like if I had that as a little kid or even as a teenager, I would have understood myself so much faster. And it's just a really beautiful resource. But they have a whole website, and it's amazing. It's a really wonderful book. And you also said, Daria, about a lot of times the social constructs that we end up having to take apart how we feel about them later are learned in places like school. We learn them from our peers because we've learned them from adults without being told implicitly. It's that it's that playground culture of, oh, you can't play with us because you're a girl, or you can't do this because you're a boy. That's all stuff that we've learned without consciously learning it. And those are all things that we end up having to either come up against, or they end up part of us. But it doesn't matter what age you are or your circumstances. If you're willing to put in the critical thinking effort to do that metacognition, you can learn a lot about yourself and about what you actually think, and whether that was something that just landed in your brain and then your brain held onto it, or whether that's actually a part of your values. And that's another part of why I love opportunities like this to talk about these issues, because a lot of times they just don't get talked about until they blindside you one day, and then you don't necessarily have the tools that you need to take apart that event.
And we know that prejudice is based on ignorance and fear. And once people hear the story and can connect with the humanity and get a little education, then understanding can replace that.
I hope so. I'm really happy that you at the top asked about what the word cis is, because cisgender is not a slur, and it's not a word that's meant to attack somebody either. Everybody has a gender experience of some kind, even if that is that they don't have gender, and cis is just a descriptor. It's not meant to be an attack. It's not meant to be a negative thing any more than trans is meant to be a positive. It's just meant to describe an experience. There's nothing wrong with being binary. There's nothing wrong with being cis. That's just a word to provide context. And of course, there are going to be people who try to weaponize every word. That's unfortunately part of having language. But at its core, ideally, no one should be attacked for the words that describe their experience. And I hope that someday we can reach a point where that is the more universal experience for people.
Seems like a natural evolution.
It does. And so with all of that, what can people do to show their support, to be allies?
Absolutely. For this, I want to pull a quote that that really spoke to me, that I found for a different project, from Kessiena Boom. It's, "And remember, being an ally is a verb, not a noun." And I really like that, because even for myself to remember that it's not, ally isn't something that you are, it's something that you do. And even if you're an ally in one moment, you have to keep working at it continuously to be an ally. And there's a lot of different ways that you can be an ally. I mean, especially a lot of our current socio-political experience has to do with Black Lives Matter. And if you're on Twitter at all, it will probably be familiar to you, the notion that you can donate, you can educate yourself, you can share opportunities to donate if you can't personally donate. You can use your platform to show your support and to condemn racism in all of its forms, no matter how small that platform is. So there are a variety of ways that you can be an ally. One of the ways that I think you can be an ally for trans folks is to listen to them. to really listen and to come at that listening knowing that you don't have to have an opinion. That just hearing someone's story can be an act of allyship, and really actively listening to them. Donating to organizations like the Trevor Project or the Okra Project. The Okra Project specifically provides meals for Black trans folks. And that I came across that recently because of the Black Lives Matter resurgence earlier this year. And you can educate yourself. There's a lot of resources online. Honestly, there's a lot of colleges have informational pages because they have gay straight alliances or LGBTQ alliances. So oftentimes college websites have resources that you can start with. You can also come to us at your local library. This is not meant to be a plug, but we are there. And
hallelujah.
no matter where you are in the country, if you have a public library, you can go onto their website and see if they have a button that is Ask a Librarian. Because then, especially if it's something that you're nervous about asking, or in the time where eventually we'll have people in buildings again, if you don't want to have to try to ask somebody face to face about these very uncomfortable, because they can be very uncomfortable, scary topics, especially if you're in public asking them, go onto the website, see if you can fill out an online form, see if they can get you started in a way that you feel safe, because that should be what we're there to do. And there's online trainings, there's a whole plethora of places that you can go to learn. But I think one of the biggest things that you can do is try to keep an open mind and try to always think critically, because unfortunately there are going to be sources of information that are inherently biased. I was really glad, David, that you earlier mentioned the transition in the DSM-5 or the DSM-2 or whatever iteration it was, from being homosexual being a pathology to it being a natural variance, because there is still a certain amount of contention between the LGBT community and medical science. Good science should never have a bias, but that doesn't mean that there aren't scientific publications that are biased. So it's always taking things with a grain of salt and trying to ask yourself, who was this written by and what are they trying to accomplish, are, I think, the two biggest things that you can try to keep in mind when you're learning about this stuff.
That's lovely. I also have to say there was something I remember hearing when, when we've been looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion and beginning to have these conversations about Black Lives Matter, not to put the onus on the person that is helping you understand,
Yeah.
that
Yes.
take some responsibility and check your privilege. And
Yes.
yeah, right?
Thank you for saying that, because that we really should touch on that. That's a huge thing that you can do is if you want to ask somebody in the community about something, don't expect them to answer, or phrase it in a way that's, if you're comfortable with this, would you mind telling me about X? Because these conversations take emotional labor and put people in a place of expertise where they did not necessarily consent to being an expert. And
as if they were speaking for the whole in this case, the whole LGBTQ community. Right?
Exactly. And that anybody that you talk to is just an individual. I'm just one trans person. I don't speak for everybody. I can only speak for me. And that's always the case when you're talking to somebody who is in a marginalized community.
Mhm.
Every individual person is unique. And that means that there is no authority on the community by definition, because it's all a patchwork of all of the experiences that are possible under that community range. But thank you, Daria, for bringing that up, because it is very important that we have this drive, I think, and I think that has to do with our desire for storytelling. We want to know what's going on from people's perspectives. We want to be able to talk about it. And sometimes the best thing that you can do is try to find out from an existing source, from a publication, rather than asking a friend to put in that labor. There are people who will be willing. Oftentimes I am willing. That's one of the reasons I'm here, because I like doing it. But that's because I like doing it.
Yes.
And not
We
everybody
really
does.
appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here.
So Mads, I would love for you to, if there's anything else maybe that you want people to know, or you can tell us what you've been up to and let people
Sure.
know about that.
Sure. Well, there were a couple of things that I realized that I definitely thought I was going to talk about that I got lost in the weeds along the way, which, again, sorry, future Daria. So I say that because I used to also do some editing. So it's just part of the gig. But one of the moments that I realized, oh, hang on, I'm actually not cis. I was sitting in an art history class, and it was, what was it? It was Greek, Roman, and Etruscan art. And there was a statue of that my professor showed, and I feel like I have to put a PSA here. The word hermaphrodite is often considered a slur now, or it's recognized as a slur because it was used by the medical community against intersex people. However, hermaphroditus is a god, the intersex child of Hermes and Aphrodite. And they're a minor god, but they're very important to me because of this moment, this beautiful sculpture of hermaphroditus is often depicted as having a sort of classic, excuse me, a sort of classically androgynous face, a more feminine looking body, breasts, and also a penis. And this sculpture of this god, which is beautiful, it's at the Louvre. I was just sitting there in art history, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, if I could control what I looked like, that's what I would look like. And that moment has stayed with me ever since for just a long time, and I think it always will. That there was suddenly this visual representation of something that had been in my subconscious that I had never recognized, and then suddenly there it was. And I think that in a lot of ways was the beginning. And the notion that gender euphoria is the other side. So gender dysphoria is when you are when you're experiencing a lack of that congruence. It's like if you get misgendered, or if you have complicated feelings about your body that's related to your gender. The other side of that coin is gender euphoria, which is when someone recognizes you for your proper gender, uses your pronouns, unprompted even, uses your correct name. Anytime that you can support somebody by calling them by the name they want to be called by, calling them by the pronouns that they want to be called by, you are possibly giving them the gift of gender euphoria, of finally being recognized when they haven't been. I have had a few moments of gender euphoria that have really stuck with me, and they have been some of the most powerful moments in my life. One of them was before I even realized I was non-binary. It was when I still thought I was just kind of always playing with gender. I was on a plane. My parents and I were coming home after a vacation, and the flight attendant was coming down to check for what people wanted for drinks. She talked to my dad and she talked to my mom. She got to me and she goes, "And for you, sir, ma'am, sir." And it just I didn't know until recently. I did not know that what I experienced in that moment was gender euphoria, but it was amazing. Just this moment of that someone recognized that there was something going on and they just weren't sure. And it still like puts a smile on my face and gives me chills when I think about it. So if you can use the right terms for somebody, you have the opportunity to give them that powerful of a positive memory. So, and I know it's hard. Language is hard, especially in English when we have a singular non-binary pronoun that has been suppressed for hundreds of years, which is they, them. Before, I think it was the 1800s, there was a point at which they, them became specifically plural only when it had historically been both plural and singular. And there are really great videos and resources about this. One of my very favorites is from a descriptivist linguist, and I can get you the link for that. He's extremely funny. But it's just it's one of those things that we were taught in school, that it can only be one way, when language, like all of us, is fluid and ever evolving. But that's also not to say that there isn't a place for neopronouns. Neopronouns are amazing, and which is just like ze/zer, or any invented set of pronouns are neopronouns, and they can be difficult to learn, and especially when there's a certain amount of like almost muscle memory that comes in, especially with parts of speech like that. But any effort that you can make to validate somebody if they've trusted you with their pronouns is deeply appreciated.
I certainly appreciate the fact that that woman was probably mortified, and she probably had no idea that it was a euphoric moment for you.
Exactly.
One of the things that for those of us like David and I, even when we were preparing to welcome you, we were tripping all over the pronouns. We were like, oh no. And the idea that there's a sense of humor, there's an openness and a forgiveness and a, hey, just try. It makes me feel so much more inspired to try, that I actually might be doing something for you or somebody, that could be a way for me to take the power of language and gift somebody with the reflection of who they choose to be back at themselves. What a beautiful thing, which I had no idea. So thank you for that, Mads.
Oh, you're very welcome. And honestly, like when you we're all human, we all mess up. Absolutely. And one of the things that in conversation with a co-presenter on a training I gave, we talked about is that this notion of if you mess up, like there's a lot of emotions that happen for everybody involved. I mean, when I've messed up in an ally way, I have been extremely ashamed. But this notion that we're gonna have an emotional response because we're human, but we have to try to just feel it and then keep trying. And that's what allyship is. That the recognition that you are going to mess up. You might even mess up monumentally. But if you can learn from it and keep trying anyway, I think that is the core of allyship. And there are going to be people that if you mess up their pronouns, you might get a negative reaction out of them. In that instance, it's probably not about you. It's about the fact that this is something that happens constantly. It's the repetition and the cumulative experience of it. There's a building of it that can be insidious. It's like with any microaggression, it carries not just the weight of the one, but of every time it's happened. And there are going to be people who respond very poorly. And just like with feeling badly about messing up, even if somebody blows up at you, it feels terrible, but granting them the grace that that's probably something that they deal with every day, and then still trying anyway, is one of the best things you can do.
And what you said earlier, that person doesn't represent the entire group. It's one human being dealing with that thing in that moment with you.
Exactly. But one of the other things we talked about, this friend of mine and I, Frances Portillo, she's a consultant. We talked about how social scripts can work against us. This notion, this was the whole thing we talked about, where if, say I misgender a friend, if I say I'm sorry, the social script, the response to I'm sorry is it's okay. But it's not okay. So not even saying I'm sorry, just saying that was wrong, and then saying the correct one, or even just acknowledging that was wrong, and then moving on, can take that onus off of the other person to tell you it's okay. And it also helps to reinforce the lesson of that it is important to get it right, and that even if you didn't, you are still trying. And that's another strategy that, again, can be very uncomfortable to actually employ, can be very difficult to get out in the moment. But if you can think about it, that's the first step.
That's a good one. It is very reflexive to say, I'm sorry, it's okay. Both of them are very reflexive.
Exactly. It's like the social script of how are you? I'm fine. Even if, how are you? Well, we're in the middle of a pandemic. How do you think I am? You know, so finding ways to recognize those and to either stop them or turn them on their head, so that they're more meaningful, to have actually more meaningful conversation is can also be very powerful. But that's those were the things that I wanted to try to sneak in here at some point. Other things, I'm doing my best to stay home. We have had some virtual holiday things that have normally every year, part of my family does a white elephant style ornament exchange. Instead, we did a Secret Santa version this year, and it was a smashing success over Zoom. So that was really fun. Every year, we also go to the Portland Revels. It's a yearly performance that talks about, they always pick like a culture and a time period, and they talk about the different traditions surrounding the winter solstice and Christmas and Yule. in that culture through song and folk dance and performance. And we've gone, this would have been the 14th year that we went, and they're holding it online. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm really happy that they're primarily funded through donations. So the fact that they're doing anything is, I'm very grateful, because I know a lot of the arts are suffering right now. And other than that, just doing my best to stay safe. I live with a very contrary corgi. She keeps life interesting. And writing and playing video games.
What about your
Keep myself sane.
So that is all healthy stuff. What on your journey, how far along are you? What are some of the next steps that you're going to be taking?
Right.
Because you had your 70th shot or something.
Yep. So that has been really interesting, because in spite of the fact that I have a lot of jewelry in my face and I have a bunch of tattoos, historically I would have said that I was afraid of needles. But learning how to do this has been just ridiculously empowering. Not everybody can handle giving themselves injections, and that's totally fair. You can go in and have nurses do it. For depending on what hormones you're taking, you might be able to have a I can't remember what it's called, sublingual supplement, the kind that you stick under your tongue and you let it dissolve. But learning how to give myself shots actually was weirdly empowering. So that's been a very cool experience. When I started, I thought that I would do testosterone for as long as I needed in order to affect the permanent changes that testosterone does have, and then stop. But I'm finding that I feel so good and so much better doing HRT that I might continue. The original plan was to do it for I think between 2 and 5 years, and then to stop, which is why this is gonna get into some surgery body talk. Just a fair warning. The only thing that they left in were my eggs, because if I went off of testosterone, I had to have something that was generating hormones for things like bone health and heart health. So they're just in there, all of the rest of it's gone. And if I were to go off of T, because I do still have eggs, my ovaries would start releasing them as though I had a cycle, but they would just get reabsorbed back into my body. So like, bodies are so weird, and that was just so bizarre and like wonderful to learn that it would just take care of itself like almost magically was pretty cool. But at this point, unless I end up changing my mind, which who knows, I think I'm probably just going to continue. Now, there are some surgeries that you can only get if you have been on testosterone for a little while. And some of them, it has to do with the insurance and getting the insurance to recognize that it's medically necessary. If somebody decides to undergo surgery to alleviate gender dysphoria, it is medically necessary. This is a PSA. Even though, because insurance will try to say it's elective when it's really not. It is in alleviation of a symptom. Therefore, it's necessary. But that's a whole there's a whole soapbox that I could get on, and I'm sliding it under the table.
We may have to bring you back so you can talk about it.
Okay, sure. But so I got the hysterectomy. I'm continuing with the testosterone. When I was first learning about transition and gender confirmation surgeries, and I think a lot of people assume that this is still the case, the playful way that I've heard it said is it's easier to make an innie from an outie than it is to make an outie from an innie. Now, while that is generally true, the procedures have evolved and become much better than they were when I was first learning about them. And if I understand correctly, there's a phalloplasty, which is an option, which is the creation of a penis from other tissues. There's also something that's just called metoidioplasty, or the meta, which is, again, body talk. When you go on testosterone, because the clitoris and the penis are analogous structures, if you have the genetic predisposition and you respond to it in this way, the clitoris can enlarge and become a small penis. That's part of what HRT can possibly do. A metoidioplasty severs I think it's a ligament, connective tissue that holds the clitoris up, which allows it to drop and seem larger. There's also all kinds of other, frankly, it's cosmetic level, but things like removing I used to know the actual word for this, the labia minora or majora, reduction of the mound, depending on what the person wants, rerouting the urethra so that it is part of the penis then. It's highly customizable, essentially, for the person, which I think is really appropriate because everybody's experience is so unique. And the metoidioplasty can have this whole range of possible parts to it that is a conversation that you have with your surgeon. So once again the pandemic is not on, that a meta of some form is something that I am interested in pursuing as well. There's also, of course, top surgery to remove the breasts. I am very lucky in that I have very small breasts. I always have. And at this point, I'm not interested in top surgery because they don't provide me with dysphoria usually. Top surgery is that it also has a very large range of different ways that it can be done, and there's different strategies based on whether the person has very large breasts or very small breasts, and what their nipples look like, and whether or not, because the nipples, if they want to keep them, have to be essentially grafted back on, depending, again, on like what's going on. And then there's also folks that, rather than do that, get extremely realistic looking tattoos. Like, I've seen people that have done like practice tattoos to that then later get covered up, but it's wild, like the photorealism they achieve with these tattoos. It is extremely impressive. But I actually have I think 3 or 4 friends who either just got their top surgery done or are undergoing it right now. One of them is recovering right now. And all of them, like, speaking of gender euphoria, like the one friend, he has wanted the surgery for like 5 years and it finally happened. And I'm so happy for him because it's been so long in the coming, and the fact that that's something that medicine can do for us, to give us the opportunity to like the bodies that we're in, is so huge. And like I said, not everybody needs that. There's also binders, which is just a garment that you can wear that helps to make you appear more flat-chested. There's a company called GC2B, the letters just GC, the number 2 and B. If I'm not mistaken, they're also local, but they're trans owned, operated, designed, and they're really high quality binders for cheap, which is nice because sometimes they're really expensive. They come with certain risks, like you shouldn't wear them for more than 8 hours, and you shouldn't exercise in them unless you, they recommend that you go a size up if you're going to exercise in them, because they will inevitably restrict your breathing. But that's another tool that if folks don't want to have surgery, that's an option. There's also folks that they have them, they don't care. They're still men. They have boobs. It's fine. But at this point, top surgery is not in the cards. Meta is, and I'm gonna keep talking with my doctor.
Great. Well, we would love to have you back. The more that you can share this amazing experience and help educate people, and I mean, I have to say, Mads, when I think of once again, I think of it as this evolutionary process that offers more choice to our inherent humanity. And I think about that very beautiful movie, The Dutch Girl. I think it was called The Dutch Girl, right? And she ended up dying. The idea that we have more choices. I don't even want anyone to have to be bound uncomfortably. Let's create choices that don't hurt.
Yes.
As we move forward. But it has been a privilege and an honor and deeply educating. And I am so very happy that you joined us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me and for having me, Daria and David.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.